Sunday school leader. I really appreciate your watching again this week. Hey, do you remember as a child your parents promising that something wonderful was going to happen? And you'd ask, well, when's that going to happen? And their reply was, don't worry about it. It'll happen when it'll happen. That's somewhat similar to Jesus' promise of his return, or what we've termed as his second coming. He promised that it will happen, but he didn't tell us when. So believers have been watching for his return for over 2,000 years now. So that's what we're looking at this week as we conclude the unit on essentials of Christianity. This is the 7th lesson. It's the last lesson. It's called The Return of Jesus. The scripture passage is out of Matthew 24, so go ahead and be turning to that. And the point of this lesson is that Jesus will return to establish his eternal kingdom. Now, the theological word for the study of end times is eschatology. And this comes from two Greek words, eschatos, meaning final, and logos, meaning word or idea. So eschatology is the word or on final things. Now, there are a lot of theories, a lot of speculation about the timing of the end times. A little over 20 years ago, the Left Behind book series was popular and then eventually became a motion picture. Some television preachers are known for their massive charts behind them explaining, according to their interpretation, when certain events are going to occur. And this isn't a recent phenomenon either. In the late 900s AD, construction on churches in Europe pretty much came to a halt because people just knew that the second coming of Jesus was going to happen in the year 1000. On October 22nd, 1844, the Millerites were quite disappointed as they went out and sat on a hill expecting the visible return of Jesus to occur on that date. Jehovah's Witnesses thought that Jesus would return in 1914. When that didn't happen, they then stated that Christ returned invisibly and has been ruling in heaven since that date, 1914. Now, in 1988, Edgar Whisenhunt, an Arkansas native and NASA engineer, wrote the book 88 Reasons Why the Rapture Will Be in 1988. I remember that well. He took the timing of all the feasts of Israel and some other information and calculated that Jesus would return during Rosh Hashanah in that year, which was going to be sometime around the September 11th, 12th, or 13th. Now he said, yes, it's true. Jesus said we couldn't know the date or hour, but he claimed that we could know the year, month, and day, or year, month, and week. Now, unfortunately, many people that believed in that theory they ran up huge credit card bills the month before, thinking that they wouldn't have to pay it back when they were raptured, only to be left with massive debt after Rosh Hashanah 1988 came and went. Now, at the beginning of Matthew 24, Jesus and his disciples are walking away from the temple when the disciples point out to him the buildings of the temple. And we receive a little more information of this exchange in Mark chapter 13, verse 1, that states that one of the disciples said to Jesus about the temple, "What massive stones, what magnificent buildings." And so this led to Jesus' long discourse about the end times. And just to make sure you know, this temple was not Solomon's temple. Solomon's temple was destroyed by the Babylonians in the 7th century BC. This was the temple that was built by Ezra after the return from exile in the 6th century BC. And then it was expanded by Herod the Great. And he started this temple renovation around 20 BC, and the project wouldn't be completed until about 64 AD. So this renovation was still going on as Jesus and his disciples walked by. The temple comprised about 1/6 of the land area around ancient Jerusalem, and it was composed of many buildings, many porches and courts and all those things that surrounded the temple itself. Now, the Jews were quite proud of this structure, not only because of its beauty, but because it also represented God's presence with them. So imagine their surprise when Jesus replied to the statement about the magnificent structure of the temple by stating that there would not be one stone left on another. Okay, that leads us to our text of Matthew chapter 24, verse 3, that tells us that the group then went up to the Mount of Olives, which was east of Jerusalem, and there they paused, and the disciples asked Jesus a two-part question. When is this going to happen? That is, when's the temple going to be destroyed? And what would be the sign or the signs that it was going to occur? And Jesus, as many Old Testament prophets have done, he spoke about both near and distant events without necessarily giving the time frame. Kind of think of it like this. I've got a drawing here of some mountains behind me, and you're at a distance and you're looking at that mountain range. And if you were to describe that to somebody, you'd say the peaks you're looking at, you'd say, well, there's this tall mountain, and beside it to the right, there's this smaller mountain. And if you look at the mountains in that range, they may appear to be right next to each other. But in reality, they can be several miles apart. And so as Jesus describes these future events, it may sound like one comes right after the other, but in reality, they can be centuries apart. So, like the temple, along with the city of Jerusalem, it was destroyed in 70 A.D., but the return of Jesus has yet to happen. So Jesus answered their questions starting in verses 4 and 5. Beware that no one leads you astray. Many will come in my name, saying, I am the Messiah, and they will lead many people astray. In every generation, there have been people claiming to be the Messiah. In fact, just in my lifetime, there's been several famous cases like Jim Jones, Sun Myung Moon, and David Koresh, who claimed to be the Christ. And sure enough, many of those folks were led astray. But make no mistake, when Jesus returns, there won't be any guessing. Believers will know without a doubt that it's him. In verses 6 through 8, Jesus talks about what will occur before his return. Wars, rumors of wars, famines, earthquakes in various places. Now, these events aren't the end, but they're like birth pains. It's the beginning of the end. And here's the thing. We've always had wars. In the past 3,400 years, people have only been at peace for 268 of those years. That's less than 8% of the time. And even then, there were probably some undocumented skirmishes that we don't even know about. There's always been famines. There's always been earthquakes as well. But it seems that when Christ's return is imminent, when it's getting closer and closer, these events will intensify both in number and their severity, just as birth pains increase until delivery. Now, our lesson text skips down to verse 29 through verse 32. And here we see, before Christ's return, the sun and moon will darken. And this is why we can discount the many false Christs who have appeared over the centuries. When the Christ returns, it will be unmistakably him, without a doubt. Then all nations will see Jesus coming with power and great glory. This differs from the first advent of Jesus in Bethlehem, doesn't it? Over 2,000 years ago, he came quietly, humbly. His arrival was announced to just some poor shepherds. The next time, though, everyone will know who he is. In verse 22, Jesus used another illustration from nature. First, he used birth pains to describe when his return was imminent, and now he used the budding of the fig tree. Fig trees lose their leaves in the winter, and they bloom in the late spring. So when the sap starts moving up into the twigs, making them tender instead of brittle, and they begin to put on leaves, it's a sign that summer is just right around the corner. So it's going to be the same thing when Jesus returns. The signs are going to be there. So just be patient. Don't be anxious. It's right around the corner. Then in verses 42 and 43, Jesus continued with another illustration. Don't be surprised by the Lord's return like someone who's robbed at night. A homeowner isn't given a time schedule of the thief, so he'll be ready for the break-in. No, he's not. He doesn't get that. The homeowner has to be vigilant at all times. And that's the point Jesus is getting across here. He's not giving us a schedule. He's just telling us to be ready. And I'm sure there are varying opinions about the timing of the Lord's return in your church and probably even in your own class. Will Jesus return before the millennial reign or after? Or is that just a figurative term that's used? Those thoughts correspond with premillennialism, postmillennialism, and amillennialism, if I can say that right, respectively. And then the premillennial camp, will Jesus come before, during, or after the time of tribulation? And those differing thoughts are called pre-trib, mid-trib, and post-trib. So there's a lot of different thoughts out there. Here's Jim's thought, okay? Even though some folks have strong opinions about this, I don't believe it should be a test of fellowship. A biblical case can be made for any of these points. And that's why in our section 10 of the Baptist Faith and Message, that's entitled Last Things, here's what it says. It says, God, in his own time and in his own way, will bring the world to its appropriate end. According to his promise, Jesus Christ will return personally and visibly in glory to the earth. The dead will be raised, and Christ will judge all men in righteousness. The unrighteous will be consigned to hell, the place of everlasting punishment. The righteous in their resurrected and glorified bodies will receive their reward and dwell forever in heaven with the Lord. So basically it's saying Jesus will return and it's going to be visible. That's about all it says. It makes no statement about the timing. That's because it's not specifically spelled out for us in Scripture. So make sure and tell your class that even though Revelation and the end times are interesting subjects, they really shouldn't be our main focus. That's all we talk about. Okay, that's not it. We're to be busy about doing kingdom work in the meantime. Okay, so we've got to know the Bible. We've got to study it, and end time study is part of that. But it shouldn't be we shouldn't just be all wrapped up in that, and that's all we're talking about all the time. All right. So anyway, thanks for watching this week. Don't forget to pray for and with your class. I appreciate you guys very much.